that, ladies and gentlemen, was Tal Finkel. We are so excited to have him today on this episode of Still New York. Thank you so much for joining us, Tal.
Of course, thanks for having me.
Yeah, and thank you for matching your drink to my outfit.
Yeah.
We are so excited to have you here with us today to talk about your art and your career and to just tell us more of what you've been up to. So, can we start off with how you got involved in the arts?
Yeah, absolutely. Um, so I've been playing guitar for like 16, 17 years, something like that. My parents were cool. They sent me to like jazz camps when I was growing up. Um, so yeah, I spent a few summers at Berkeley in Boston, a couple in Connecticut, here and there doing different programs. I was doing like jazz guitar in high school mostly. Uh, and then when I was a freshman in law school, which was 6 years ago, I started doing open mics because I was so stressed out and freaked out about law school that I kind of realized that I valued like my creative friends a lot more, in contrast to people I was meeting in law school, uh, and the creative parts of my own personality a lot more, and I wanted to kind of nurture that and keep it alive. So I was doing open mics, and then I got a residency in my neighborhood here. This place called KGB Bar on East 4th. I did maybe like 15 shows there, where I was doing like old jazz and blues stuff. I was like singing and playing these old guitars. And then around that time, I started playing with friends who were DJs at nightclubs, which was a lot more fun. And I kind of leaned into that more and more. And for the last like 7 years, I've been doing that a lot, like all over the world and all over the city. And then over lockdown, I bought a lot of instruments, a lot of equipment and stuff. I learned how to DJ myself finally, and started doing my own spots where I was booking under my own name. Yeah, and next week, or I guess in a couple of weeks, on the 12th, I'm doing a show at Ludlow House here in the city.
That's amazing.
Yeah, I'm
That's so
excited.
exciting.
Yeah, you guys are all very welcome. And yeah, we'll see. I mean, that's like an area of my life where the growth is really important. And I was never paying any bills playing music, but it's important to me that I'm doing bigger gigs and getting better and learning,
Yeah, absolutely. That's so incredible. And did you wind up graduating from law school, or did you wind up making that decision to go straight into the arts and leave law school behind?
No, so I did graduate from law school.
Oh my
Just
God. So you graduated from law school
yeah.
and you're also pursuing the arts. That's incredible. I've only graduated law school in a musical called Legally Blonde. So I'm very, very impressed by anybody who's actually graduated law school. Um, do you find that when you're doing music and that when you're creating music and you're practicing, what do you find keeps you coming back and keeps you wanting to improve your craft?
Well, for me, it wasn't diligence or discipline. It was like therapy, So especially
Mm,
in my early 20s, like I was even more lost than I am now, and I would have nights where I like couldn't sleep, and I'd be staying up playing music all night. It was a big refuge for me, and when I first started performing, the feeling of being on stage was really, intoxicating. It made me feel really alive, and that plateaus after a while, and then eventually, like by the time I was done with that like first residency, it started to feel a bit like work. So I think it's important to always be doing new things and feeling challenged and being nervous,
yeah,
Uh,
absolutely.
so
When I write comedy,
mhm,
I get into this state that I think of like the force field.
yeah,
If I'm feeling the force is like when I'm writing comedy and I'm writing jokes that I start to feel are working, or it's like witty wordplay and I'm like, ooh, this is a funny euphemism, or this plays into this bit. I start to get in this state that I call the force field, but a lot of people I guess call the flow state. Do you
yeah,
experience that with music too?
absolutely. Yeah, so almost all of the music that I play these days is improvisational. So it's really about like you can't be like a millisecond in the future or the past. Like 100% of your focus is like right there in the pocket. Otherwise, you'll drop the ball. And it's been nice because now that I'm working with like the DJ equipment, I get to play a lot of weird music from around the world, like throughout genres and eras and stuff. But more than that, I just get to like, instead of playing with a band, take the groove from these tracks that I want to share, loop it out, and then pick up the guitar and just like shred a little bit, improvise a little bit, put it back down, and then play out the songs. And it's been like the perfect balance that I found as a performer, better than playing with any band, better than like any of the other types of performances that I've done. So I'm building that out. There's so much in common with, and so much that I've learned from comedians, and the process, like of just like getting on stage and working on performance art in general. But I really appreciate like the process, and I empathize so much with comedians, like just as much as musicians, if not more. Yeah, I spend a lot of time in comedy clubs for sure.
I am so excited to hear you in real life soon. I was going to ask you too, going off of that, is like, who are some of your biggest influences who are musicians, either of this decade or previous decades?
Yeah, well, I honestly, I don't listen to much contemporary music.
But for jazz, I guess then, who are like some of your.
So when I was first coming up, some of my early teachers started me off with like Django Reinhardt. I don't know if you know like gypsy jazz kind of stuff, like from the 30s, like. And then this other guy, Wes Montgomery, he's like big jazz blues guys from the 50s. Stuff like that. And then probably 10 years ago, I got really into the blues. I heard this guy named Stevie Ray Vaughan. Ever hear about him?
No.
He was good. He was from Texas. Really, really good. Died early. He died in like 91, something like that. Like 1990. He was like 35. But he like kind of was responsible. He's like a big part of this like blues renaissance scene.
Yeah.
In like the 80s, like late 70s, early 80s, and throughout the 80s, where like the blues really had a big revival in the States. Yeah, and that guy changed my life. I heard him. I was in college with my girlfriend at the time, watching 16 Candles.
Mm-hmm.
And out in like 83, 84 maybe. And there was a song of his on the soundtrack. It's this song called Lenny. It goes like this. So that's on the soundtrack for 16 Candles.
Whoa, that is so impressive to me, because I am one of those people who only knows 4 chords on the guitar, and then it takes me years to get to the next chord. So I'm always just like in between chords, I'm just like, think of a loved one, as I'm like trying to switch. So it's incredible. Like, your talent is just super, super impressive. And thank you just like so much for sharing it with us today. I guess my last question is, what is your advice for young artists, specifically musicians who want to play in the New York scene or in their cities, and just kind of getting started on shows? Yeah,
you got to really like push for. I mean, the open mic thing is, it's hard to, and again, it's exactly the same with comedy. Like people start with open mics, and like that experience is, you go, if you're lucky, you have like a friend or two supporting you, and you spend the whole night like sitting around like waiting to go, and everyone there is just like waiting to go. like it's not the most present audience. You get up there, like usually it's like a drunken, like loud crowd, you know.
Mhm.
So yeah, I mean, it's like the best practice is when you're on stage for sure, and having gigs on the calendar. Like the value in the gig comes before the gig actually comes around, because once you like, especially by the time you've invited people that you don't want to like make an ass of yourself in front of, it gives you that like deadline where you really need to like tighten everything up and get it together and have things polished so you don't look bad in front of people that you don't want to look bad in front of.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Open mics, I would suggest too. I would like totally echo that
Yeah,
for musicians or comedians or singers, anyone who wants to be in the arts. Like going to an open mic sometimes is almost harder than the actual show, I found.
yeah,
Like especially when you're testing new stand-up material. I don't know if this is like the same thing with music, but because you were saying like an open mic crowd is usually more inattentive, it's
right.
almost like you're practicing in a tougher circumstance, like you're
Yeah,
almost like altitude training.
right,
You're
right,
like,
right.
okay, if I can do these jokes and make it through an open mic, then by the time we get to the show, I'll already have flexed this muscle, this
Yeah,
creative muscle by the time I get on stage. So these jokes, I already know what I'm doing. I've already had a feel for being on this stage,
yeah,
and then you're ready for game time.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. I think the big hurdle for most people, and it's weird because like the interest in performing is so separate from the interest in music. And like especially when I was like in the more academic circles and like jazz camps and stuff like that, I was around musicians who I'll never be able to touch like technically. But a lot of them aren't interested in performing, or if they are interested in performing, they want to be like in a band in the background, you know. So I
yeah.
think like being comfortable with that kind of attention is like half the battle, you know, and enjoying it is amazing. But yeah, like you need to really own that space, and to be a performer is a really interesting. I'm not sure if it's a healthy like thing to like too much, but for me, especially in my like early mid 20s, it was like one of the most positive things in my life to have these gigs like regularly. It was like a social thing where I was in New York, like nobody really has space, you know, and I love like throwing parties and stuff. So to be able to like invite everyone to a place and come out, and like the music was like almost secondary at that point. That was really like healthy and positive, and people really respond well to seeing artists like doing something that they're passionate about, you know, like regardless of if I'm playing for somebody who has any idea about the guitar or about blues or about jazz, about whatever I'm doing. If they see that I'm like in that flow state and then I'm like playing from my heart, it inspires them to do whatever they're doing creatively in their life. And I've seen that time and again, and like that's the most rewarding part of it. Um, you know, because quintessentially, like the most humanistic thing to do is to be an artist. You know, everything else is being automated. Everything else is like what I was responding to in law school, which was like a lot of soulless work. And they never asked me to be creative in law school, you know. So I had to like,
I faced the same problem when I was at Harvard Law on stage in Legally Blonde. No, but that makes sense. That makes sense. Is I think you're totally right to echo what you said in all seriousness, all joking aside, which is hard for us comedians. I think that making art is brave, and especially your own art, because you're improvising, right? um it's coming from the heart, so it's and even scarier and probably more vulnerable, it's coming from your mind, right? Like it's almost like you're showing a bunch of people, often strangers, your
yeah,
mind.
yeah,
um and a lot of times they resonate with that, and you never know, pun intended, when you're going to strike a chord with someone, whether it be on guitar or in comedy or singing or whatnot. And um, yeah, it's not easy, but it's not for the faint of heart. But I would say totally worth it if it's something you're really passionate about. So
yeah.
thank you so much for sharing your
Com-
gift.
comedy is so much more intimidating also, you know. Like if you put me on stage and you give me a guitar, I can do things that I've had good feedback about over the years, so I'm not really anxious about it. If you put a mic in my hand and ask me to be funny, God damn, I mean that's a much more vulnerable position, because you're also not in that like flow state where you're just with the band or with the instrument. It's an interactive thing where you're getting you're getting the feedback for every beat.
Yeah, but if you put a guitar in my hand, oh my God, you'd be so thankful I'm a comedian. You'd be like, please hand her a microphone, please. Get this thing out.
Where do you get up usually?
Where do I get up?
Yeah, when you go.
Like Broadway Comedy Club, Greenwich Village, Stand Up New York. I've done Stress Factory, and it's all great because I think like comedy and music, both of those things are like something that really connect people from a lot of different groups, right?
Absolutely,
And that's what I love is like,
and it's a bit of a meritocracy, which is rare, like one of the things about getting gigs in New York that I kind of lament, even though it served me sometimes and been a burden or an obstacle in other times, is that like it's so much about networking, where there's no shortage of talent. I mean, there's so many talented people in every direction in the city, but they're not all platformed, and not a lot of them know or are interested in like in advocating for themselves in that way. But yeah, like it's really important to like have those spaces, and it's really important for those communities to like help each other and to push each other. I see it in comedy a lot. It's one of the most beautiful things about comedians. And the live music scene in New York is tricky. I think the comedy scene in New York is relatively better. There's better places to be a live musician than New York City, for sure. But I don't know if there's better places to be a comedian.
Like in terms of networking, do you find that like, or when you started out, did you find that you were going to places and kind of asking for slots, or did somebody see you on stage and then they were like, Tal, you're really talented. We have this time on stage. We'd love for you to perform. Like for our musicians out there, how did you kind of?
Right. I wish that it was audition based. I really do. I wish that somebody told me once over the last like 7 years, like, all right, like come show us what you can do, because I feel ready to audition and confident in whatever. Like I don't want favors. I just want like opportunities and slots, but the truth of it has been, I've exaggerated. When I was really starting out, I was just like kind of bluffing and saying, oh, sure, I've played all over the place, whatever. And then you do a couple shows and it goes well and it leads to more. The best way to get gigs is to have good gigs, and like it would always lead to like 2 or 3 other ones. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Tal, for joining us today and for sharing your music with us. We're so excited that we got to talk to you, and I can't wait to see you perform live.
Yeah, I hope you can make it. It'll be fun.